In this presentation, we will pay sales tax. In other words, we've been tracking sales tax as we make sales that are related to taxable items, for us being the inventory items. QuickBooks has a nice system for tracking the sales tax payable. We will be using that system to now determine the amount that will be owed and then pay the sales tax within QuickBooks Pro 2020, QuickBooks Desktop 2020. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. We currently have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by selecting the view dropdown and going to the open windows list. We're now going to be considering the sales tax. Now, sales tax is going to be something that will be applicable depending on where you are at. In other words, if you're in the US, you're going to have typically sales tax, but it's not a federal tax. It's going to be a state and local tax. So you're going to have to determine where you're at, what kind of application or what type of sales tax you are subject to. And that could depend on your location and, of course, where you sell to, where your customers are at. Could be some of the things that will determine whether or not you are subject to sales tax. Then you need to consider how you're going to basically collect the sales tax, when the sales tax is going to be due, to determine who you're going to be paying the sales tax to and how often you have to pay it. In other words, oftentimes if you don't pay a lot of sales tax, then they may not make you required to pay the sales tax only basically annually or yearly. If you pay more sales tax, then you might have to pay the basically sales tax monthly. And so you need to check your location to see what the sales tax will be, what the regulations will be with relations to the collection of sales tax and the payment of the sales tax and who is subject to the sales tax. Now, we set up the sales tax in a prior presentation, and you can think about the sales tax in terms of, or look at the Edit tab and go down to the Preferences. And then we have the sales tax down below. And then in the company preferences, we took a look at these in a prior period. Some of those preferences include when do you pay sales tax down here, and who do you pay for the sales tax, setting up the sales tax items. Now note again, you could pay the sales tax monthly, quarterly, or annually, or the options that are here, the most common type of options that we would see. We're going to say monthly, which means that typically, if we have the month of January, we would make sales throughout January. We would collect sales tax from our customers during that time period in accordance with the laws and regulations related to sales tax. We would put those into a liability account, and then we have basically sometime in February that we have to pay sales tax. So at some point, let's say we have till the end of February to pay the sales tax that we generated in January. That's the system that we have set up here. Again, it could vary depending on how much your sales are and what region you are, what the rules related to sales tax will be. The general idea of sales tax is straightforward. We basically make sales, we have to charge sales tax, we have to collect that sales tax for the government, and then pay that sales tax. It just depends on what the rates are going to be for the sales tax, and who gets charged on the sales tax, what determines who's going to get charged on the sales tax, and how often do we have to pay the sales tax? Who do we have to pay the sales tax to? So once that is set up, then as we create invoices, as we have seen in the past, if I open up an invoice, I'm not going to record an invoice. I'm just going to go to a prior invoice. We've seen that if we make an invoice for guitars, which we sell, inventory items, we had them be taxable. Our rate of taxation for sales tax for the example problem being the 5%. Therefore, the invoice already has been collecting sales tax for us as we've been basically generating the invoices, calculating the sales tax, and recording it as a payable. Closing this back out, where has it been recording it on a payable? Let's take a look at the financial statements. We're going to go to the reports drop down up top. We're going to go to the company and financial. We'll go down to the balance sheet standard report. Within the balance sheet standard report, we're going to adjust the customized report dates up top. And that's going to be at 01/01/20 to 12/31/20, January through December 2020. Then we're going to say OK. The sales tax has been accumulating down here in the sales tax payable. And so once it's all set up for us, then QuickBooks basically, it makes it nice and easy to accumulate the sales tax up for us. That's how much is owed as of this point in time, or even as of basically we've been doing this through February in our example problem. If I was to double click on this, then you would say, here's January and February. There's the total sales tax that is due. Now, obviously, we owe that to the government, and we might have to do an information type of sales tax form in order to calculate the sales tax for the government as well. But this is the amount that would be due as of basically the end of February 20th at this point in time. However, what's going to happen is we're only going to pay monthly. So it would only make sense then for the government to say, hey, January sales tax, once you've calculated it, determined how much is owed to us, we'll give you, say, till the end of February to then pay it to us. So therefore, now we're in February, second month of operations. We owe the sales tax, but not the total $223.37, but the amount that had been accumulated during the month of January. So we have January 1st. I'm going to change the date to 01/31/20. So this is the amount of sales tax, the $123.37 that had accumulated in January that we would need to then pay in February. The sales tax that had accumulated in February under this system, and we're making this system up, but this is a reasonable type of system. It would vary depending on the factors we talked about. The sales tax for February would then be due or in March, right? You'd have to collect it in February, then you would pay it in March. So that's going to be the system we're going to set up. So I'm going to close this back out. So then you're going to say, well, why don't we just write a check for the sales tax? That's all we have to do. And that's true. We could just write a check for the sales tax, and we will write a check for the sales tax. However, QuickBooks has a nice little tracking feature for us as well, and that's over in the home page. So instead of just simply writing a check like we could do, we're going to use the managed sales tax item up here. Now, notice the managed sales tax item is kind of floating in the vendor section. That's because the person we're paying someone, and therefore that's a vendor. We're paying the government for the sales tax. So we kind of think of that as a vendor, so they put it up in the vendor section. But notice it's not connected to anything in the vendor section because it's the government, and it's kind of weird. They kind of just stuck themselves into the system somehow, so we don't know where to put them really because it's not part of the business flow. And it's really kind of more connected to the customer cycle over here, right? Because usually we have the invoice, which is increasing the sales tax, and then you would think that at some point that's the arrow that would kind of go to the sales tax payable that's then going to be payable. So it's a little funny to think about, where does this go? Taxes are always funny because taxes are not like a natural part of business. They're kind of outside the normal flow of things. So we're going to say, let's go to the managed sales tax item. If we go in here, you have some useful little items within here. And one is going to be the sales tax preferences, which will take us back to that preferences tab. By the way, I'm just going to go through these. At the end of the day, we're just going to go to the pay sales tax item here. But if we look at the things they have here, we got the set up the sales tax. If I select that, it then takes us to the preferences tab that we just looked at. So that's the preferences tab that you can also get to, closing this back out by going to the edit and the preferences down below. Then we have the prepare sales tax forms. Run the following reports to help fill out your state sales tax form. So note, each state might have a different kind of information form to fill out along with the sales tax. So they don't want just a check, they want the information form. And these reports can help you to fill out that form. So if I was to go to the sales tax liability, for example, changing the dates, notice if I go to the whole date range, 01/01/20 to 12/31/20, this should match what we saw on the balance sheet, right? We had the amount for the sales tax payable, the $223.37. Going to the balance sheet, we've got the $223.37. I'm going to go back to the sales tax report. So here we have the total sales. These are the non-taxable sales, and this might be necessary for us to do that. The government might say, hey, what are your total sales? How much of them were non-taxable? Therefore giving us the taxable sales, and then calculate the sales tax on it. In our case, we said that the inventory items were taxable, and the non-inventory items, the service items, were not taxable. And then we would take the taxable sales, the inventory items, multiply it times the tax rate, which is 5%, and that's going to be the total tax. Now, of course, we want to run this report not through the end of the year, but through January 01/31/20. That's what we're going to be paying. So it's in February right now in our example problem. We owe the sales tax through the end of January to the government. So these are the sales then in January. Here's the non-taxable. Here's the taxable sales for sales tax times the 5% gives us the tax that we got to pay the tax collector. So that's that report. If I close this back out, then we go back to the manage sales tax in the open windows. We also have the sales tax revenue summary report. Going into that similar kind of process, if we went to this and said 010120 to 123120, we have a similar report, total sales, non-taxable sales, just a more of a summary detail, and then we could figure out the sales tax, which is 5% once again. And once again, we'd probably run this report for the end of January, 013120, and we would run that report like so. Closing this back out. We also have some more resources down below. Related tasks, we can view the sales tax items. So if we go to this item, it's going to go to the report for the sales tax items. Those are the items that are in the view tab or the lists group in the items lists. We only have one sales tax item because we only have one location. If there are multiple locations, we have to deal with sales tax. Possibly if we have like an online store and we're shipping things out, we may be subject to sales tax more than just the one. Closing this back out, we have the open sales tax code list. If I was to select that, we have the list of codes, either taxable or non-taxable. Closing this back out, I'm now going to run the tax. I'm going to go through the process here, pay your sales tax vendors in QuickBooks. So this is going to be the process. We're going to say, hey, it's the end of the month. I got to pay sales tax for the prior months. I need to generate a check in essence to do that. I'm going to do that with QuickBooks System. It's in February now. I'm going to pay the sales tax that was collected and not yet paid for the month of January. We're going to go to the pay sales tax. Here we have it. We're going to say pay sales tax from the checking account. The check date is going to be the 28th. So I'm going to say plus to the 28th. Shows sales tax due through. We only want the sales tax due through 3120. So the first month, even though we're in February, we're only paying the sales tax for the month of January. It should auto-populate then the check number as it is doing here. That looks good. We're then going to say and check that off. That's the amount we owe. If we need to make any adjustments to it, we can then go to the adjustments here. If for some reason that number is wrong and we need to adjust it, then we can look at the adjustment settings. We're thinking it's okay at this point, so we're going to say okay. And then we record that information. Now, normally whenever that happens, whenever we do that, I usually go to the check register. Notice we could have printed that out as well. We didn't print it here for the practice problem, and you may not print it at practice. You may write an actual check and just need to enter the data into the system. I like to go to the check register typically after I write a check from somewhere and go to the banking, go to use register, and I'm in the checking account. And we have down here the check that we wrote then was for, and notice I made an error from a data input error. If I go all the way up to the top, I put it in there for 2019 because that's the current year, and I should have put it in there for 2020. Common data. If we had the alarms on or the alerts on, it would have told me, hey, you put in the wrong year. But I'm in a practice problem, so we took those off. So I'm going to adjust the date now. I'm going to go back up top. And I'm simply going to make this check, and this is something you could do in QuickBooks, not something you could do so easily if you were, something you want to be careful of whenever you make an adjustment like this. But I'm going to say this should be 2020, and then we're going to record that and say yes. And if I scroll back down, there we have it now in the proper place. Notice it says the tax payment. Again, QuickBooks has another format of just basically a check reference. It's a special kind of check, but it's still simply a check. Then if I close this back out, and we go back to the balance sheet and see what then happened, we know that the checking account should be going down. If I double click on the checking account, we're then going to scroll down and we see the check that we just wrote for the 123. Once again, note that it says sales tax payment. It's still just a check. Don't let that make you confused. What does that mean? It's still a payment, a check, but it's a special check that went for sales tax. So that's going to help you out a little bit more to give you a little bit more detail just at glancing at the type of transaction that has been done. So if I double click on that, notice again, still just a check here, but you'll note at the bottom of the check, it's got a bit different of a field within it. And that's because it's a sales tax and we did it with that other format. Closing this back out. The other side of this is going to be on the sales tax payable. Sales tax payable is down to 100. If we double click on that, then we see that we have the sales tax increasing, and then we paid it off here, and we're left with the $100. Now, the 100, of course, represents the items that accumulated in the month of February. Those are still due. We don't owe them until March. In March, we'll pay the amount of the sales tax that is accumulating in February. So we'll go back to the balance sheet, just take a look at the numbers we have so far. This is where we are at this point in time. You can review those numbers, and if anything is off, take a look and you can go back and adjust it. Note that, of course, we will be creating backup files as well. So if you would like to restore the backup file and just push forward from there, then you can do so.